Okay guys, we're going to get started. Again, like usual, we're going to take a look at some of the homework that got turned in. Just sort of go through a few sort of, common issues. I feel like this guy's working as well as it used to. Hopefully that'll help. Anyway. So in no particular order, again, I don't do this to single anyone out. It's just some of the problems that come up are universal. And so the first time I run into it, it's just easier to pull that one up. So Ryan, I apologize because you're first in the alphabet. And no, it's just, I know, it's like everybody's, I end up doing this every semester. So I think whoever's like last name begins with an A is always, everybody sees a lot of their work. Okay, we're going to start and take a look at the Coca-Cola paths first. So I'm going to zip in here and take a look at it, and what ends up happening a lot, and you can sort of see it here, and I sent this note out to quite a number of you. Sometimes you try to bite off more than you can really chew. You can sort of see in some of these instances right here, there's a real problem tracing all of these lines, and it's just because the spaces in between each of the points it's just too much to actually handle. If you zip back out and you're doing it at this sort of focus or this sort of scale, it seems like you're doing actually better than you really are. So I stay in pretty tight on this, and you can spot small little problems just like this guy. If we take a look at this, you can see that some of these are single handles, which is great. That's all single handle stuff. But some of this stuff, as we start to get around in here, we'll take a look at this guy right here. Again, this is a case where it probably called for a third point. It's almost, in some ways, you might, if you spent a lot of time working on this thing, you might be able to pull it off with 2 points, but it takes up too much time. There's just simply no reason to do that. So at any rate, that's just what I would consider doing in that one. I'm not going to save this part. The next one we're going to look at is David's. Now, a lot of people are doing this kind of stuff, so I'm going to say this on several occasions, but when you guys look at this, specifically looking at this layer stack, does anybody see a problem? I'll help you out. Does anybody see a problem now? So, and what does the transparency mean? Yeah, that's exactly what it means, that there's nothing is there. This is a destructive move, when David went to actually make this layer. So I'm going to show you what I sort of mean by that. We're going to launch the Coca-Cola, so I'm going to simply command click to load the Coca-Cola. I'm going to add a blank layer on top of this. I'm going to fill it with the same color of red that he had. Let me load that path again as a selection. So can you tell me what is the difference in this that I'm looking at right now, solid red color with a Coke layer mask on it, and this? They look the same. What's the difference? This is a destructive move. There's no going back. The Coca-Cola mask here is baked in. I can't adjust this mask. There's no mask on here. It's just gone. So why on earth would you throw away pixels that you might be able to, that you might have to, that you might need later on? Why throw those away when you get the exact same effect by just using the layer mask in place? So this is what people are doing. They're taking these layer masks, they're putting them on there, and instead of just leaving it, it's doing everything it needs to do, but it also gives me a fallback. I can also go in here and change this if I need to. But instead, people are throwing this down to the garbage. You get a thing that says, do you want to cancel that move, which would simply put the layer mask back on the layer? Do you want to delete the layer, which would just throw it away and leave us a blank layer? Or do you want to apply it? And people are hitting apply and saving this. That is a destructive move. I just threw away half of my pixels of that layer, and I can't undo that. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. You'll see this repeatedly. I want to take a look at Emily's really quickly. And again, Emily, you're not the only person that struggled with this. But if we take a look at this, you can sort of begin to spot what the problem is in here. You can sort of see it's just a series of straight line segments in here. That's why this thing has that sort of like a little bit of a clunkiness to it. It doesn't really have any sort of soft round curve. If we take a look at this mask points, you can see that none of these points have control handles. And that's what this tool is all about. It's about using those brazier curve control handles to give you these beautiful sweeping curved lines. So again, if you didn't get it during the lecture or whatever, please go back and watch the video. But the shortcut to all of that is to also look in our session week number 4 right here on the PDF where it says Pen Tool and Pass PDF. It's only 3 or 4 pages long, and it tells you exactly how to do all of this stuff. It talks about, again, getting rid of that second control handle, the whole 9 yards. It's all written out right here. This is actually where I learned it. This is from a book that goes back from Photoshop 6. But I mean the original 6, not CC6, but the original 6. So this thing came out probably sometime in the early 90s. And it's where I learned to do the pen tool work that I showed you guys to keep it sort of simple so that it actually works for you. So at any rate, okay. I'm going to show you Lillian's next. So again, this is another case where somebody has built a layer mask, taken the layer mask and thrown it away and applied that in a destructive move. And this is what we end up with. But the path itself, if we take a look at this, if I click on any one of these, you can see that in her case, she's kept a bunch of the double lines. Now, I mean the double control handles. Now the double control handles, again, as long as your path handles are moving in a really close relationship to the path that you're trying to create. So is the static on this thing more annoying than just not? Do I keep the microphone on or not? It's kind of annoying, right? I'm going to turn it off and yell. Sorry.
Will we be able to hear you in the video?
Oh yeah. The video's still recording. That's this other microphone. Yeah, no, I'm the mic. Yeah. Check. Yeah, just to make sure. Yes, it's still. So at any rate, taking a look at this again. So as long as you've got control handles that are moving, and you can see, I'm not sure which direction she was moving in when she drew this thing, but as long as these control handles are hugging very close to the line that you're trying to describe, you don't need to get rid of the second handle. It'll work just fine. You don't need to. So you'll see in this case, you don't need to get rid of those. However, where you run into serious trouble is like what's happening up in here, and she's kept both control handles here. And this is a really hard thing to control, this sort of like change in direction right here. She's unable to follow the path. You'll see that's what's causing part of this miss in the line right here. It's also what's causing this part of the miss in line right here. So, and it's also what's causing these things right down here. You can see this is a control handle that there's a point here that's got a single control handle. It should have had no control handle on it at all because you're moving into a hard corner. So it should have simply been placed and then had a control handle at the other point. So again, if she's moving in this direction, then it actually makes more sense. But nonetheless, that's basically what's going on here. So I don't have a problem keeping that second control handle as long as it's not something that is, again, as long as you're sort of able to continue the arc that you are working on. So it makes it faster because you're not spending all of that time having to reset your cursor onto that center point, clicking down, holding down the Option key and clicking to get rid of the second control handle. So if you guys watch the video of me doing that outline in the demo of doing when I actually demoed the pen tool, you'll see that a lot of time I'm simply continuing to stroke up. I'm not actually getting rid of that second control point. But when you reach a point where you've really got to diverge from the line that you're trying to actually describe, then you've got to get rid of the second control handle. It'll never work if you don't. So I want to take a look at Max really quick. And in this one again, applied layer mask, no reason to do that, just FYI. But if we take a look at the, at the control points, this is something that I wanted to show you guys right here. So you can see in this case, in Mac, I actually sent this to you on an email. I think that trying to describe this much of an arc it's ambitious. Again, it's not impossible, but you just find yourself taking so much more time trying to, tweak it in, whereas the addition of a small point in there may have actually helped you, out somewhat on some level. But I also want to talk about how you actually can fix certain things. So, and we're going to look at this on a couple of them right here. I'm not entirely certain I can fix this guy. If I couldn't fix it, what I could do is I could select this inner part right here and simply hit the delete key to get rid of it and then redraw the whole thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually see if I can't trick it out a little bit. So this doesn't work using the black arrow path selection tool, because if you use that, all it does is select all of the points in the path. And when you go to move something, it moves the entirety of the path. Now, that's a great thing if that's what you need to do, but that's not what we need to do here. In this case, what we need to do is actually go in and fine-tune those points. So I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to grab the white arrow, the direct selection tool, and again, I usually just drag across this thing so that it actually grabs the points. So the first thing, I'm going to zoom in on this so you guys can really see it. I'm going to click on this first point right here, and you can see that it stays blue, everybody else turns white, and that means when I click and move this is the only thing that actually moves, is that point. So I can actually set that in a more exact spot from where it was. So this is the difference of what I just did. And again, it's more to the point. It's where it actually should be. I can also do control handle parts on this. So I'm going to click and bring this guy down just a little bit more. It actually describes that bottom arc a little bit better. Where things start to get wonkier right here, and this happened with a lot of people, is that again, these control lines, if I come up here and I click on this, these control lines, the problem that we've got right here is that this line describes this arc really well, so that got the top of it. But again, I'm having a problem with this bottom part right here. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and click to get rid of that. And then I'm going to click on this bottom one down here and see if that isn't the one that's actually controlling that arc a little bit more. And it actually is. But again, I would probably come in here and put another point in this guy. If I click on him again, it actually brought that line back. So again, that might be something that I decide simply to grab the whole thing and redraw from the beginning. Also remember, when you screw something up, your best bet, instead of trying to come in and reset these points and move them around and grab the handles and do all of that, is to simply go back in history before you did anything and get rid of it. If you have to select it and get rid of it, that's fine. Just select it, get rid of it, and do it from scratch. But there's a number of things like this. All of this can actually get tweaked out a little bit more. So anyway, that's all that I'm actually talking about. Anyway. So Anthony, I have no idea, speaking of, can you start? Yeah. I think we need to look at how your pen tool is set up. No, because inevitably you are struggling with overlapping elements in your path work. And I'll show you what I mean by that. This goes for everybody else. This is a PDF that you definitely want to download and keep in your possession. Again, it's in our session number 4, and it is this path components, how overlapping paths intersect one another. This is a little bit confusing, so I'm just going to show you what it is you're looking for and how to fix the mistakes, and then we'll go from there. But the problem that I saw with yours is that it's just, it was happening for every path that you did. So I'm thinking there's an issue somehow in the beginning part of it. Now, it's all fixable. But I'm unfortunately happy that it happened so that I can point this out to everyone else and how you ultimately deal with it. But say what? No. So this is one of the reasons, and again, very few of you guys took my advice when I told you it really helps to get your previews and your channels, your layers, and the paths bigger. So again, most of you guys have still got this. If I come to panel options, most of you guys have still got these little baby panel things. And look at that. You can't see that there's, I mean, you can see something in there, but you can't tell that there's a problem in there. But if you use the bigger of the thumbnails for all of those palettes, you can see that the Coca-Cola part right here, the cocoa part is actually done, and the C of the cola part is done. But all of a sudden, the O and the L and the A of the cola part are grayed out as well. I mean, it's the same tone as the background. I have a black line to outline it, so there is a path there. If I click on this, you can see that there is a path there in its entirety. But look what happens when I load this as a selection. I'm going to command click to load this. And you can see that it actually got the coca part completely selected. The C is also completely selected. But this part of the path that's sitting down here is not. This guy it didn't end up selecting it. The truth of it is, what's actually going on here is that the part that you see that is white on a gray background is the subject, and it is the correct way you want this whole path to look. It should be the area that you want to be selected when you load this as a selection should be in white. The opposite is actually going on here. If I only had this black part on here, if I didn't have any of the white, if I only had the black outline of the path that represents the other part. So here, I'm going to show you again. There is a path there. So Command D to deselect that. I'm just going to click on this. You can see if I select across this part, there's all the lines are there, all the paths, all the points are there, the lines are, all of that stuff is there. But when I go to load this as a selection, it's because it thinks that this is background. That's what it thinks is going on here. It thinks that this path is trying to select the background and not part of the image itself. So to fix that, you select, just make the entire path active. So I've got this guy active. You need to select everything. So for me, you can either do it with the direct selection tool or the path selection tool. I'm going to click up at the very top and drag across the entire thing, and it selects everybody. And then there's this thing, and I don't ever know how to describe this. This is up in the options bar. It's these two squares that are right under the word Photoshop, or at least that's where they are on my screen. If you click on those and open it up, you will actually see this is how you can cause paths to interact with one another. And in this case, we need everybody to be sort of on the same plane. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and every time I come in here and I think I know which one of these is that I'm supposed to pick, it's never the one that I'm supposed to pick. But nonetheless, what I know that I'm looking for is to get the whole Coca-Cola to be in white against a gray background on my path palette. And if I can do that, then it is correct. More often than not, it's this one at the bottom that says exclude overlapping shapes. If you click on this one, you see that OLA just became active. It's now white like everything else was. So now when I load this as a selection, command click, everything is loaded as a selection, and I continue to work like that. And again, I can't, at times a lot of times I think what happens, and I don't know if this is how you were actually making it, I know you can run into trouble if you start doing like your interior paths before you do the exterior ones. That can start to get wonky on it. It confuses Photoshop what it is you're trying to do. So remember, we're always working from the outermost edges towards the innermost edges in that order. Everything from the outside first, then the next level in, next level in, next level in, and so on. But at any rate, that's how you ultimately fix it. And it's not going to hurt if you come in here and you actually do the wrong thing. You go back. Everybody, let me continue to go back. So in here, you can select the wrong thing. Like I'm going to do combine shapes. And actually, that one also worked. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. We'll try intersect shapes. That makes everybody now the background, which is completely wrong. Command Z to undo it. And again, I'm basing this all on the preview that I'm looking at right here, because there's no other way to tell what's really going on. You don't see, when I do any of these things, you don't see any of those points change. I mean, nothing looks any different as far as the image part goes, but it's definitely different in the preview. So back to exclude overlapping shapes, and that'll actually give you what you're looking for. Okie dokie. Back to the beginning. And back to Ryan. So in this one, Ryan actually started out well. He just ran out of space. He didn't go ahead and complete the neck part of it. I'm less concerned about that than other things that are going on in here. If I take a look at the path palette, I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to, ooh, big trouble right here in the beginning. Look what's happened. The path is no longer in register with the face, and that's a problem because you've gone to all this trouble to make this path, and now it's no longer in register with the face. Now, could you try to actually move this thing around and get it back into place? Yes, you can actually click on this, hit the V key to get the move tool, and try to sort of get it to go back into place, that kind of stuff, whatever. But it defeats the whole purpose of having a precision path. You can see I've got it sort of around the nose, but up in here, I don't have it there well at all. So I'm going to just hit Command Z and undo that part. Again, if I select the path to take a look at the points, you'll actually see that this is another one of those cases where none of these really have, that's not true. It's not that none of these have control handles, but take a look at what's going on with this control handle. It's extremely short, which is a problem to begin with, and it's also not pointing along the line of the path. So I don't know if Ryan was drawing from the top down in this direction or the bottom up in this direction. That's my suspicion, that it should have been going up in this direction. But you can see, if I jump back out of this, you can see that there's this little divot right here in the path right here, and that's because his control line is going completely against the direction of the path. So again, if I select this guy and grab it and bring it up like this and have it run more along the line of the path, then that's exactly what we want this ultimately to accomplish. And also, as a second part of this, you can see the number of points that he's dropping down in here. These are unnecessary. They have no curve in them at all. Let the pen tool do its work. So I'm going to simply start with a brand new path and say, okay, hit the pen tool, and show you that we can actually describe this in really few points. Again, this is one of those cases where my control line, that second control handle is actually following the line. So I'm not even going to bother to try to get rid of that, of the second handle. It's actually going right along the path, so I don't need to. I'm simply going to click here and continue to work out along the line. And I can probably get this to go the opposite direction as well. So again, I'm not even getting rid of those second lines, and this is the path now that I've created. Just so you can see what it looks like without the points. And you can see it describes the arc of that face perfectly, and I use 3 points to do it. So just something to keep in mind. Take a look at Jack's really quick. So this was a mistake that more than half of you guys made, and what ends up happening is this. When Jack actually made this, he does a fairly good job. If we take a look at his knockout, it's actually, this part has worked out pretty well. However, the path is no longer a part of this image, and so what he did and what a lot of you did was you actually opened up the image of the girl, you actually did your whole path work, you created a mask for it, you put the layer mask onto the layer, and then you grabbed the entire layer of the girl, of the profile, and you drug it onto the metal. And when you did that, you orphaned the path. It's no longer a part of this image. That thing is now gone. So there's no way to refine it, there's no way to go back and adjust it, there's no way to take advantage of the path anymore because it's simply gone. So you had two options of this. The first solution and the easiest was to simply grab the metal background and drag it into the profile back image, and then you would have never lost the path. That part never that option never would have come up. The other was to attach the path itself to the layer before you actually did the move. And we'll take a look at how that works as soon as I get through looking at everybody else's in here. The other thing that I look at when I do these things is I option click on the mask, and you can see here, look how sharp this edge is. This mask is tack sharp, and so again, the pen tool is an incredibly precise tool. It's too precise, so it does what you want it to do, but then you have got to soften these edges up slightly. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. The first is if you actually have a path and you make the selection, then you come up to the select menu, down to modify and down to feather. That's one way of doing it. Another way to do it is to simply select the mask like I've got it selected right here, and is to blur it. So just to come up to blur, Gaussian blur, and we'll hit this again. It's the same pixel thing. So if I was going to do a 1 pixel feather when I did the modify in my selection, it's the same as actually adding a 1 pixel Gaussian blur on this. That's another way of doing it. And finally, the last way of doing it is they've actually added a feather option in the properties panel for the mask. So it's not working on the pixel layer. This is the pixel layer, and you can see this is what's going on in my properties. But when I select the mask, feather is actually one of my options. So if I hold down the option key and click on this so you can watch, you can see you can feather the hell out of this. You can really, you can control the entire thing after the fact. This feathering also works on vector masks, which we will take a look at in just a second. But at any rate, those are the other things that I look at here. I want to take a look at Mari's really quickly. So this was actually done correctly. You can see she's actually brought the metal over to the image that's actually got the profile on it. The path is actually still there. It's actually still in relationship to this, so I can check all of that. That part works out really well. If we go in and take a look at the mask itself, though, so again, I'm just going to simply take a peek at this. Again, you can see here that the mask hasn't been feathered here, so this would just be a quick way to actually feather it a little bit. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to turn off the path so we don't see that part, and then just see what this thing looks like right here. You can see it happen in real time. Again, this edge is just a little bit too sharp. So if I feather the mask just a fraction here, after the fact, whatever, it gives me a better transition as that goes into there. And so this is the difference. It went from here to that. So again, just to take that edge off just slightly is pretty critical to do this. Yes.
So with the feathering, let's just say if I have, how do I word this? If there's if the mask is touching multiple things,
Yes.
how does it shoot? Does it just feather everything?
It does.
Is there a way to what if I want one side feathered and one side not? Is there a way to
You could use it. Yes. So yes, yes. So this is a little ahead of what we're doing. We're actually going to get into choking and spreading today, but I really believe in asking those questions when they come up. So we'll actually do it with Mari's image right here. So in this case right now, what I've got is a mask that has not been feathered. So I can go to my history palette right now, and I'm going to do a history snapshot of this. So that's what the little camera down at the bottom is. Again, if you don't know this part or what's going on here, we're going to go through this in much greater detail today. But I can do a snapshot of this, and in the snapshot, I'm going to call this pre-feather. And say okay to that, because again, this is before we've actually feathered this thing. Then I'm going to go ahead and actually blur the mask. I'm not sure it'll work on this feathering part right here, but I know it'll work if I simply blur the mask. So I'm going to come up and hit the filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to do a pretty heavy blur so that we can really tell the difference between the two so that you guys can easily see it. So I'm going to hit it with a 3.3 pixel blur, which is pretty serious. And I'm going to do another history snapshot of this. And I'm going to call this post blur or post feather. And now I'm going to undo it all. So I'm going to go back to where it was. I just undid the blur, but I have got two history states that sit up here that actually are snapshots of what my image looked like when I made that snapshot of it. You have a history brush. It's not with all the other brushes. It sits right above the, or right below the clone stamp tool. It's this history brush. There's also an art history brush. Art history brush is not the one you want to use. The art history brush is to actually create art. A history brush deals really with your history. But if you select your history brush, and then if you take a look in your history palette, you can sort of see there are icons that are the history states that we've done. This is where the name where it's actually named after her is actually what this image looked like when I opened it. And you'll see there's a little icon on the left-hand side. That's saying if you use the history brush, you want the result to look like that state when it was made. So if I click on the pre-feather one, I can actually then paint you with the history brush in my pre-feather in the pre-feathering what it looked like before it was actually feathered. However, this image right now looks like it does before it was feathered, so you wouldn't see anything else. But if we put this little mark, the history brush check mark, next to the post-feather, again, you do not want to select these states. You can actually click on a state and it'll select the whole thing. That's not what we want to do. So I'm going to go back to this part right here. Instead, you just put the little icon next to the left of the history state, and then with your history brush, this works like all brushes. It has an edge to it, so I'm going to have mine relatively sort of a middle hardness, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and then make sure I'm working on my layer mask, and I can simply come in here and paint that history state wherever I want it. If I don't like what it looks like right now, I can go back to my pre-history, my pre-feather state, and say, well, I liked it on the bottom of the nose, but I don't like it on the mouth, and you can simply paint it out there. So I can go back and forth forever in this, as long as I've made that original history state that happened before I did anything, and then another one afterwards. I can go back and forth until I close this image. These things, unlike your normal history, where once you have hit your 50th state, you hit your 51st state, you start to lose history. These snapshots, there you can have an unlimited number of them, and they sit up there at the top until, again, you close the file. And when you close the file, you lose them all. Are there questions about that part? Okay. I can't tell if B's here or not. I'm sorry?
He's not coming.
Okay. I just wanted to show that this was actually very well done. So again, it's the image that's got the path in it. That part's great. If we take a look at the layers and take a look at the mask itself, I'll zoom in here on all this. There's a small amount of feathering, not very much, but there's a little bit in here, whatever. Metal got brought to the mask, to the profile instead of the other way around. It was just extremely well done. We're almost through this. Back to Ryan. As long as we've looked at every one, we might as well look at them all. In Ryan's case right here, what you can see that he has done, and he's actually done well, if you click on the body part, the body outline is actually done pretty well. But you can see he ran into a problem here. There's a part of the background part that's actually still sitting right here. And I think part of it was because he does not have a unified path. Now, he could do other things. Like, for instance, he could load this bottom path as a selection. You can see that'll actually deal with those parts of it. Come back over into his layer mask part right here. And again, what's happening here, or at least what I'm seeing, is the background is actually showing in this. So I would want to add black to this part of my layer mask to hide this part of the background. Black is my background color, so it's Command Delete, Command D to deselect. So it's those sorts of things. You can clean it up after the fact. But I think the better way of doing this, come back to the way we were, is to simply bring this all together into one path. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the path palette. You can see it's this small little, it's this part that's on the side over here. You need to select the path. So again, I typically work with the direct selection tool, but I drag across everything. I do a box across everything to make sure that you've grabbed all of your points. I'm going to do, instead of a cut, I'm just going to do a copy. So Command C will do a copy of this, or up to the edit menu down to copy, either one. Go back up into the body and do Command V, paste, or again, edit down to paste. And then if I take a look here, you can actually see it brought in that part. So again, because I've got a relatively large thumbnail, I can sort of see what it just brought in. So I'm going to do Command Z, and you can see that's without it. Command Z again, this is with it, so this is actually done. And then I need to do the same thing with the other path right here. So again, I'm going to make the path active. Grab the direct selection tool, drag across to get all of the points, Command C to copy, go up to my top one, Command V to paste, and then we'll see how this guy works. Shoot.
So when you copy and paste those to the first path,
Uh-huh.
do you have to keep the other two still there?
No.
You get rid of them?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to, instead of doing copy, I just wanted to make sure everybody could still see what we did. But I can drag across this and I can do Command X, which gets rid of it. And then puts it up here. But again, so now I can actually Command click to load this as a selection, go back and apply this as a layer mask. And you can see this is, snapshots also are a great way to see steps that you've actually done. So before and after. If I do another history snapshot right now, I'm just going to name it snapshot number 1. If you go up to the top now, we can go back and forth between the original version and the new version really fast. So I click on the top, this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. And so you can just go back and forth. But it's a way to actually pull all of your paths together. Almost done. I want to show you Lauren's really quick. Again, path is actually already in here. That part was great. Image done exactly the way I would hope it would be done. There's a virgin down here on the bottom. The metal got moved to the figure image. If we zoom in and actually, take a look. Everything looks reasonably well done in here. If I hold down the Option key and click, you can actually see, again, that mask has been slightly softened, which allows that blend part to go in much, much, much better. It was just really well done. One last one of these. So the issue with this is when I look at this, you can see the only thing that we've got here is the work path. And if I click on it, you can see the basically what it is. It's just this small sort of like opening between those two pieces of those two sort of like leather tie straps. That's the only thing that's left. And so, but if I look at the knockout itself, the knockout parts are really well done. So my suspicion is what's happened here is that they actually did the initial path that actually got the entire body, but then never ended up saving the path. And once the path got deselected, I'll show you exactly because we've done this before. You can see the path is right here. If I select outside of this, hit the P key to get the pen tool and start a new path, that original path is gone. This work path is a temporary space. And so unless you get into saving your work paths to make them an actual saved path, it's just a temporary holding spot. And anytime you actually try to go and do something else, you will actually lose everything that's on that work path. So instead, I'm going to go back in history. This is that work path right now. You can sort of see, again, it's that little, here, let me drag across it so everybody can sort of see the handles on it. So that's what it's these points right here. If I double click on this, that's one way to do it, and I can just call it path number 1. That's all it takes. And now if I click out of this, hit the P key to do a new pen tool, and now I'll start working on a brand new work path. But the path that actually had those that original cutout, whatever, is there. And if I save this, any path that actually gets named or path that is actually saved ends up being saved with the image. You don't lose these. These are not like history. The work path it's a temporary thing. In previous versions of Photoshop, anything that was temporary, they used to do in italics, and I think that I wish they would go back to that because the work path name would actually be in italics, indicating to you that it was a temporary thing. They would do the same thing with layer masks. If you were to click on a layer that actually had a mask on it and look down here, this background, this thing right here would actually be in italics, indicating that it's a temporary mask, because if I click on another layer, that mask is no longer there. It's only visible if you're actually clicking on the visible layer. And then finally, one last one of Anthony's, just going over that same overlapping problem issue. So here, if we take a look at the path right here, you can see the entire thing is inverted. So if I command click on this right now, it looks like you've got marching ants going and they're selecting the subject, but you also see there's marching ants going around the entire exterior of all the edges of the image itself. So if I click on this, I'm going to throw this mask away really quickly, the one that's on there. Delete it, and then just add another layer mask. You can see it masks it's a mask to keep the background visible. Now, obviously, I can hit Command I to invert that, and we're back on. But if you want to fix the mask itself, select the mask, make sure that the layer of the path is actually selected. You also need to actually activate all the points. So again, I'm going to grab my direct selection tool and drag across everybody to make sure everything is selected, and then again back to this overlapping sort of situation. I'm going to see what exclude overlap works on this. And again, you'll see in that case, it did not work on this. Because again, what I'm looking for is the gray background and the white figure. So I'm going to try combine shapes. And that's what I'm actually looking for. Although you'll see that the arms right now are actually also a part of this. And I need those to actually go to the background as well. So let me see if I can get something else in here that'll actually deal with that part. That gets me back to where I was. That gets me everything in the background. And that gets me back to where I was again. So I'm going to come up to the very top to combine shapes. So this part's working, except it's kept the spaces between her arms in the wrong spot. So I'm going to click outside of this to actually eliminate that part. And then using the direct selection tool, the path selection tool, I'm going to select the path that is this arm right here. And then again, go back up to this. And I think we're going to subtract that from the first shape. And you can see the little gray part that's in the background. So that's correct. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, select that part of the path. And again, click in this drop down and subtract it from the front shape. And now I've got a path that is exactly the way I want it. If I command click on this, this is actually what I want to use to create my layer mask. And get rid of that. And add that, and you can see it actually works. Questions about this? Okie dokie. So, really quickly, I'd like to do this with everybody. We're going to do this really fast. If you could go to your session number 4, into the assignment folder, we're going to grab just the metal background and the profile both. So I'm just going to command click to select them both, command 0 to open them both up into Photoshop. So again, this is why I like keeping, this is why I don't like that tab behavior. I've already told you guys about that. So that's why I'm not, mine come up as separate images. It's just easier for me to do this dragging and dropping between stuff if I can actually see the images themselves. If I feel like the space is too crowded for me, I simply click on the little yellow button at the very top to temporarily dock it off. So while I'm actually working on this part of the image, I'm going to dock the metal sort of out of my way. Again, I want to just outline the profile of this, and I want everybody to outline the profile with me. But I'm going to start and show you just a couple of tricks as we go along, and then I want everybody to go ahead and finish theirs just to make sure that everybody understands what control handles are doing, how to get rid of ones that are causing you problems, all the sort of above and all of that. However, when I start on this, again, I like to be able to start outside of my image to do a path. And I can't do this in the normal view of this. When I can see those little 3 stoplights at the very top, it means I can't, anytime I've got a tool, I'm going to hit the P key to get the pen tool, you'll see I've got a crosshair, but the minute I actually touch the ruler or get close to the ruler, it becomes the cursor for my system. It's no longer a tool in Photoshop. If I hit the F key though one time, it actually gives me a pasteboard. So now I can actually work with my pen tool. You can see I can put a point all the way out here. I've got points going all the way outside of my image that don't really have anything to do with this. Photoshop will understand what's going on and actually make that correction. So instead of actually trying to get rid of these points, I'm simply going to go back in history to undo that part. I'm going to start at the bottom. And this is, so just watch what I'm doing here really quickly. Again, I'm going to click, I'm going to come up here. This whole hump right here, you can actually get, this is what you want the pen tool to actually describe. So you don't want to put a point right here in the middle of that hump. That defeats the whole purpose. I'm going to put one that's actually up here, sort of up as her shoulder starts to more level out. And I'm going to simply click and drag out like that. Now you'll see that this point that I've got sitting right out here is right on my line that I want to continue. So I do not need to come back into here and hold down the Option key and click to get rid of that second handle. I can simply continue. So I'm going to hold down the space bar to temporarily get the hand, to move this so I can continue to work along here. And I'm just going to continue to click and drag. By the time I get to this stage of the game right here, a lot of people would think that this is this comes to like an arrowhead, that it comes to a perfect point. There is a slight bit of curve in here, so I'm simply going to put a point on the other side and click to drag back to actually give it a little bit now. My line is still, the control handle that I drug out is still running along my line, so I'm going to click here to put in a little bit of curve. Again, looking for hills and valleys, sides of the mountain. I'm going to click right here in the side of the mountain right here to describe the lower chin. And at this point, my control handle is no longer running along the path line. So this, I've got to break this now. I've got to click. So I'm going to come back to the center point here, hold down the Option key, click once. That gets rid of that second control handle, and it can start my process all over again. So I'm going to simply click here to actually add a small bit of curve, and then again on the other side of the mountain. And at this stage of the game, I'm still pretty much along the curve that I'm trying to get, but I want the point to be right under the handle, and I can't do that with it there. So I'm going to hold down the Option key and get rid of it, and then just simply start to work my way around the rest. So I need everybody to really quickly outline this profile. If you did really good on your first one, you can just watch. And then once you get outside onto the pasteboard, it's just a matter of going around. Your points don't matter at this stage of the game anymore. I just put them all the way outside. I'm just bringing it back so that I can get back to my beginning part. So this is how I basically start my path out. So has everybody sort of got a path that they can begin to work with? You want me to hang on for a second? Okay, no, I'll give you time. Are we okay? See? No? Yes? Wait? Don't wait. I certainly give you a couple seconds. Anybody else want me to wait? Are we good? Okay. So first things first, go to your path palette, double click on this thing that's called work path, and I'm just going to rename it profile. And say OK. And at this point, I would save my work. So I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to throw mine in. I have a folder that I keep on my desktop called Toss. You guys might want to create one of those. It's a great place to throw temporary stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and save it to there. And I know at any given point I can go in and just throw everything in that folder away. I don't have to worry about. It's just a way to keep your desktop not quite so cluttered. Okay. I am going to then come off of the pasteboard because I need to open up my other file, and you can't have more than one file visible on the pasteboard at a time. But it's done. It did what I needed it to do. Hit the F key again. It'll take you to the black pasteboard. You lose all of your tool palettes and controls, whatever. F one more time, and it brings you back to just the image that you actually had going. You'll also notice that it truncated the line, so the path line now is like coming across her body. I don't think that that's going to matter, but we will find out when we actually go to load this thing and try to work with it. It shouldn't actually be an issue, but we'll see if it is. Okay, so before we do that, I'm going to actually get my window done, the metal background. I want to actually deal with that part. So I'm going to come to the window menu up at the very top, come down, and you will notice that all of the files that you have open will be sitting down here at the very bottom. So I'm going to select the metal one. It undocks it. It brings it actually open. There are a number of things that we've got going on here. The metal is a smart object. It's got a gradient that's on top of it, and then it's actually got, if we take a look at this, it's a color mixer channel is actually going on top of that part as well with a gradient built into it. Now, I can drag all of this over onto my image, but the easiest thing to do is to actually group this into one thing. So to do that, I've got the channel mixer the channel mixer adjustment layer on the top is actually selective. You can see it's active. I'm going to hold down the shift key and select the metal. That selects all three layers. So I've got the metal layer, the gradient, and that color mixer channel adjustment layer are all selected. I can then come to the three little menu lines that are to the right of the tab that says layer, click on the drop-down menu, and I can do a new group from layers. And when I do that, it'll actually open up and it'll say, okay, do you want to call this group 1? And I'm going to rename it. I'm just going to call it metal background. And say okay to that, and it's now all in a single group, and I can drag that group over onto my profile. That's one way of doing it. I'm not a big fan of doing things that way. I think that there's a much better way of doing that. So I'm going to go back in history to when I just opened this up. I'm going to, again, hold down my shift key to select all layers. So I've got all three of these layers selected, and I'm simply going to turn this into a smart object. Now remember, when I do that, it's going to take everything here and dump it into that one protective envelope, and the only thing that I will actually see is that envelope. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and convert to smart object, and you can see it just becomes a single layer right now, and it's much easier for me to actually deal with that. If I need to do some work in there, if I need to change something, I can always double click on the smart object and it opens all three of those adjustment layer, the image layer, the gradient, and the adjustment layer come back open again. So it's not a problem that I actually have here. Before I actually drag the metal over to the background, I'm going to come into my background, and I'm going to make a copy of my profile, Command J. It's just a safety on this so that I don't screw anything up. I am going to select the bottom profile because when you drag a layer into an image, it puts it above whatever layer is selected. So if I had my top profile copy selected, it would put the metal on top of everything and all I would see is the metal. But if I put it down, if I select the one at the bottom, it's actually going to then insert that metal profile between these two copies, which is what I want to do. So I'm going to grab my metal profile, click and drag it over onto the image. Before you let go, you want to hold down the shift key. That will actually center the metal. Now I can't see it because the profile copy on the top is hiding it, but if I turn off its eyeball, you can actually see exactly where it is. I'm going to turn the eyeball back on, and then I'm going to actually add a layer mask to this. So I'm going to go to my path palette. I'm going to command click on the icon of that path, and you'll notice it's selected the whole thing. It didn't, that weird path line that was running down through her face. Photoshop can remember that I had used all of those points outside the parameter of the image, so it loads it the exact way that I want it to be loaded. Now there's a trick here that a lot of people will use. For me, I pretty much just guess on this one, but I can show you a trick. So for me, typically I would come up to the select menu, come down to modify, and then down to feather. So again, look at my image up here, select menu, down to modify, down to feather. This lets me soften this edge at this stage of the game. So I'm going to put in a 1/2 pixel, 0.5, and say OK to that. And it actually softened it. The problem that I have with this, though, is that you can't really tell because it's just the marching ants. So I don't really see any shift in all of this. So I'm going to go back in my history and undo that feather. So you can just hit Command Z if you want to. That'll just take it back. If you look at the bottom of your tool palette, right underneath your foreground and background color, there's a square that's got a little dotted circle in the middle of it. If you click on that, this is the quick mask tool. And what it does is it turns your selection temporarily into a pixel mask that you can then go in and change. You can actually paint on this, you can blur it, you can do all sorts of things on this. And then once you're happy with that, you click on that very same thing again and it reloads it as a selection. So at this stage of the game now, I can actually take a look at this. I can't feather this. You'll notice there's no modify, select, modify, feather because I don't have an active selection going, but I can filter it. So I'm going to come up to the filter, come down and do blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to put in that same 0.5. And so now I can use my preview button to turn it on and off to say, yep, is this enough of a softening for me? It doesn't look like it really is, so I'm going to put in a full 1 pixel. And again, I can turn this on and off, and I can see, yep, that's actually a pretty good soft edge. So I'm going to say OK to that. And then again, click on that little icon right underneath your foreground and background color. And you go out of the quick mask tool, and you can actually see now that the marching ants are a little bit more onto her body itself because of that blurring of that. Come back over to my layers palette, click on my top layer, and simply add this as a layer mask. Command D to deselect. And if you hold down the Option key and click on your mask, you can see that there's the pixel selection has just been softened enough, and it actually makes for a really good blend composite. So that part's actually working out well for me. I'm going to double click on the hand to zip back out. I'm also going to go to my metal and close it. Again, you can have too many files going and get confused, so I'm constantly doing that sort of housekeeping. However, in this case right now, I take that back. I'm going to reopen that metal again because we're going to do something else with it. So up to the File menu, come down to Open Recent. And in the Open Recent dialog box, you are looking for Metal, Copyright 2006, Daniel, whatever. And it will open it back up again for you. I'm going to temporarily dock it. So there are people who would say to me, well, Versa, there's got to be a way that you can actually move this figure to the background and actually keep the mask intact. And I would say, yes, you're right. But there's a couple of things I want to look at first before we do that. And the first thing we're going to look at is we're actually going to move this, the profile on top of that. I want the actual profile to face the other direction. That'll be something we'll try here. So I'm going to click on the entire layer. I'm going to come up to the Edit menu and down to Transform. And then at the very bottom, Flip Horizontal. So again, all I'm doing is flipping the girl's profile so she faces the other way. So again, make sure that you've got the entire layer is selected. I've got the pixel content of this selected, but as long as you have the layer selected, this will work. Edit menu, Transform, not Free Transform, but Transform down to Flip Horizontal, and she's facing the other way. But if I click on my layer, on my path palette and click on it, you can see I've now broken the link between the path and the image. It's no longer together. And that's a problem for me. I've gone to all of that time and trouble spending building that path. I do not want to orphan this path, and that's what happens if you actually grab the path and move it over to the metal instead of the metal to this guy. But if we go back in time and undo that flip horizontal, we can actually add the layer, the path itself to this layer so that when I flip it, it will flip the path as well. To do that, you need to actually select the path palette. You need to click on the path to make it visible and active. Then go back to your layers palette and click on add layer mask, and it's going to add a third one. If you take a look at my layers right now, I'm going to open this up so you can see it even more. We have got now a pixel layer on the very top. We've got a pixel mask. This pixel mask you can actually paint on and do all sorts of things. But I've also got a vector mask on here. And what this is it's just a copy of that path. If you actually click on it, you'll actually see, you can actually come in and edit this. So I'm going to grab the direct selection tool. You'll actually see I've got, you can see the path is actually sitting right here. I can click on it, I get all the little dots on it, all that kind of stuff. This is the vector mask right here. So I'm going to unselect that part, come back up here again. You can actually dismantle, or not dismantle, you can actually hide any of these masks. So if you hover over the pixel mask, and you hold down this shift key and click, it puts a big X on that. Now the reason I didn't lose the knockout itself is because the vector mask is now controlling what I see here. So if I hold down the shift key and click on the vector mask, I don't have any knockout left. It actually goes back and it just shows the original image. So I can go back and forth between these two and pick one or the other. You do not want to pick both of these things because one will actually override another and can get confusing in here. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the vector mask on here. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and click again so that that's on there. But the problem that I have with the vector mask is that it's too sharp. I cannot actually, I've got the vector mask that's actually selected. I cannot feather this thing because again, it's basically a path. I can't do that. I can't load this here as a selection. But what I can do is, again, I've got the little brackets that are around the vector mask. In the properties panel, you can actually have a feathering right here. You can click on this and you can actually feather a vector mask. And you'll see you can actually really crank it here, something fierce. That's not something that I would want to do. Again, that one pixel feathering on here would actually work really well as far as that part goes. So it can still be feathered. But the best thing about this, I'm going to double click on the hand and I'm going to reset my workspace so that you guys can see everything here. The best thing about this is that I can now flip this again, just like we did before. So I'm going to come up to the the edit menu, down to transform, down to flip horizontal. And you'll notice that it not only flipped the image, it actually flipped the pixel mask, but it also flipped the vector mask. If you take a look at your path palette, you will actually see there is a copy of your vector mask right here. If you don't want this copy of the vector mask attached to that layer alone, because right now it's attached to that layer alone, if I turn off my layer, you will not see it in the path palette. But if you turn it on, it will actually be there. You can simply drag a copy of this down to a little square that's got the plus in it, and now you've got a copy of that vector mask. So I'm just going to do profile left. And say OK to that part. And now it's actually saved. So now if I turn off that part, you can actually still see the profile left vector mask is sitting right here. So it's a way of actually continuing to deal with that. However, it gets better. You can also drag this to another image and it will bring the path with it because the vector mask is actually attached to this layer. So I'm going to grab my metal layer. I'm going to make sure I'm sitting on the very top of this. I'm going to then grab the profile that's got the vector mask on it. I'm going to click and drag it over, hold down the shift key and let go. it actually puts this new image, puts a profile down onto the metal background. And again, if you look in your path palette now of the metal background, the mask is still there. It gets even better. If I transform this mask, first thing I'm going to do is make a copy of this one, just so you can see the difference. And then I'm going to go into my layer. I've still got that top layer selected. I'm going to do Command T to transform it. I'm going to click on the link between width and height, and then I'm going to type in 50 to make it, where did you go? This will be a good time to stop this because this fucks up the video recording. So hang on 1 second. We're almost done here. Let me just finish this last part of this. Okay, so back on this metal background. Command T. To bring up the transform dialog box, click on the link between width and height. I'll just use the scrubby slider to drag this down to 55%, something like that, and go ahead and say OK to that. Did not have my layers selected, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Double click on this to see what is selected. I need to make sure that the entire layer is selected. So I've got my entire layer selected. I do not need a path. And again, transform Command T. Click on the link between width and height. Use the scrubby slider to bring it down to 50% or 47%, fine. Say OK to that. And then take a look at what happened to the path. It actually rescaled the path. So this path is still in perfect, it traces out what I'm looking at on here perfectly. So it's exactly what I ultimately need this guy to be. So I'll select that part of it. Get the direct selection tool, and you can see all the points are exactly where they would be. So you need to make sure once you do this, make your paths that you actually connect them to the layers that you made them about, so that when you transform them, rotate them, flip them, move them to another image, all of that happens to the path itself, and you never have to redraw these things. Make sense? Okay, I'm going to call this quarter after. Let's do a hard 10. If you guys could be back at 25 after, we got a lot to get through today.